You're watching Force 13's live streaming service. Force 13 began its Atlantic hurricane forecasts in 2016 and, whilst not giving out numbers, highlighted a particular danger area in the Greater Antilles. Sure enough, later that year, in October, Hurricane Matthew struck Hispaniola and Cuba and then moved on to eastern Florida. In the Western Pacific, the usual suspects were highlighted in the Philippines and in southern Japan, but it was Taiwan that got the first strike from Typhoon Nipatak. 2017's risk forecast was a bit hit and miss, with Cuba faring the worst on the forecast, almost true in reality with Hurricane Irma, but notably missed out, particularly with Hurricane Harvey. The danger areas in the Western Pacific were also highlighted on this graphic, the orange and red areas showing above normal chances of major typhoon conditions. For the most part, the season was a dud, but the forecast did verify with Typhoon Hato, Noru, and Talim. In 2018, we put out our numbers for the Atlantic hurricane season of that year, 12, 6, and 2, and our key messages there, which highlighted the potential for landfalls in North Carolina and on the western Gulf Coast. The Eastern Pacific blew away pretty much everyone's expectations with much higher numbers than the ones forecasted, with the western coast of Mexico a particular concern, which was demonstrated by Hurricane Willa late in the season. Our Pacific typhoon season numbers were a bit bold, and whilst we were very close with tropical storm numbers, typhoon and major typhoon numbers actually were a little bit too high in the forecast. Apart from northern China, Korea and the eastern western Pacific Ocean, the forecast on the key messages there were pretty much on point. So our 2019 predictions look like this. In the Atlantic, we're expecting 13 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes this year. The chance of below average is 33%, near average 38%, and above average is 29%. In the Eastern Pacific, we're expecting an average year again, even though we were wrong last year. 17 tropical storms, 9 hurricanes, and 4 major hurricanes. 35% chance of below average, 45% of near average, and 20% chance of an above average season this year. In the Western Pacific, we're expecting 27 tropical storms, 14 typhoons, and 10 major typhoons this year. A 45% chance of below average in the Western Pacific, 35% of near average, and a 20% chance of an above average season here. In the northern Indian Ocean, we're expecting 6 tropical storms, 2 cyclones of Category 1 strength, and 1 major cyclone of Category 3 strength or higher. In the United States, Pender County in North Carolina has the highest chance of tropical storm conditions this year with an 81% chance. All the red areas are above 55% chance, and those consist of parts of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, North and South Carolina, as well as Cape Cod, Massachusetts. In Mexico, Baja California Sur has the highest chance of storm conditions in 2019, followed by Jalisco and Veracruz. In the Western Pacific, the northern tip of the Philippines, the southernmost part of Taiwan, and southern China including Hainan, as well as the Japanese Ryukyu Islands, are most at risk from typhoon conditions in 2019. Now for the latest reaction and more on 2019's key messages in the Northern Hemisphere, it's over to Studio 4 of Force 13 HQ. So it is, and it's me again. Hello, this is Force 13 Live, and now you've seen the numbers, we're going to discuss everything that we're going to be expecting in this year 2019, and with me is the team in this hour consisting of quite a few people to talk about it. Of course, it is a very significant subject. So guys, what did you think of what you've just seen, witnessed, heard?
I mean, I only saw the Atlantic and the East Pac numbers because my internet's acting up, but
In the Atlantic, we're expecting 13 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes, guys.
So
That's
interesting.
about,
pretty
I'd
interesting.
say maybe the average of what I was predicting.
But it looks like there's a lot of uncertainty with it.
Yes.
Just look at
Yeah.
the chance of below, near, or above average.
I mean, if this El Nino persists and the subtropical Atlantic continues to be very favorable like it was last year, we could see potentially slightly above average activity.
Yeah, and, we're talking last year. Our forecast for last year, what was it, 12? And,
Yeah.
It would have been a pretty close prediction if not for all of that subtropical stuff that was going on in the Atlantic. I think it was six of the storms, I think it was, that were subtropical at some
I think
point.
it might have been 7.
Seven?
I think it was
Good
7.
Lord. That's a lot.
I think that's the most in history.
It would be a surprise if that happened, anything like that happened again this year, but, we can't rule out a handful.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We'll get on to potential impact points a little bit later on, but we'll just leave those numbers there. If you've got any comments for us on the stream chat tonight, we're streaming on both YouTube and Facebook. Send in your comments and your thoughts, any predictions, anything you'd like to share with us. Tag Force13 on the YouTube chat. So that there is the Atlantic numbers. Let's just see if we can get up the East Pacific numbers. I'm just working slowly with this now. East Pacific looks like this: 17 tropical storms, 9 hurricanes, 4 majors. Guys, with the slight El Nino, what do you think of those numbers?
I would definitely disagree with that. I think that it could be an above average season with both the El Nino and just the trends that we've been seeing over the last few years. It seems like the East Pac has been very active in recent years. I mean, you take last year had the highest ace on record of any season, and we had like 10 major hurricanes.
Tough act to follow, though, after quite a few busy years, and it may well happen again. I guess a lot of this hinges on whether the El Nino will persist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I personally think for the East Pacific this year, number-wise, it could rival or even beat 2018 in numbers.
Really?
Well,
Yeah, given the trend of what's going on.
I mean, that would be, I think, putting it close to 2015 and 1992 in numbers.
We're getting a few coming in here: 2010 5, 18 11 5, 19 9 4 for the East Pacific there. We had a few Atlantic numbers earlier as well: 12 5 1, 10 4 2. So not very far from what we're saying as well. The Western Pacific, I know some of you missed the broadcast when we put out those numbers. West Pacific, we're going with 27 tropical storms, 14 typhoons, and 10 major typhoons this year. Any thoughts on
The West
that?
Pacific this year, I think that we'll have a storm like Sudalor.
I mean, we already had Wu
It'll
Tip
hit
after
Taiwan.
looks like I would agree with the West Pacific forecast.
Interesting.
I would as well.
Other people saying similar numbers really again there as well in the comments as they're going along with us here. And the North Indian Ocean went 6-2-1, which some people might raise their eyebrows at, but certainly the current climatological conditions favour possibly an active season there, maybe a major cyclone. But then you think about last year, and it wasn't too far away, and it got one major cyclone too.
Someone just put out a prediction, 2013-5 for the Atlantic.
20. What's going on there? 2013.
That might be a little bit on the high range, just saying.
And someone else said 16-8-3.
I just want to change to the key messages now. We haven't shown this yet, so this is something you'll want to look at. This is the Atlantic key messages for 2019. It's a bit cut off the screen, so I'll read it out for you as well as we look at it on the screen there. The key messages: significant, 60% roughly, possibility of a hurricane landfall between coastal Georgia and North Carolina. And that was pretty much intimated in that map earlier. So again, we could be looking at your neck of the woods, Tim, in North Carolina as a potential hurricane landfall zone.
Indeed, considering according to the probability of tropical storm force conditions, Pender County is Surf City Topsail Beach, which nearly took a direct hit from Florence last year. So anywhere from Topsail Beach down to Charleston, down into that Savannah, Georgia region, which that's a really hard area for a hurricane to hit. Anywhere up in that area, according to our key messages, is not out of the possibility.
Yeah, if we got another Matthew-like storm, especially places like Savannah, Georgia, could definitely get hit pretty hard.
Considering, and Nathan, you're the historian on this, I believe the last time Savannah took a direct landfall was, I believe, 1908. I might be a little bit off on that date.
I think it was a bit further back than that, actually. Wasn't it 1898 or something like that? I can't remember.
Was it the 1893 storm?
Could have been. We're talking. I think we're comparing it during Matthew. Anyway, let's just move on here. Moderate possibility. This is around 30% chance. So it's not particularly confident, but a moderate possibility of a major hurricane landfall on the U.S. Gulf Coast between central Texas and the extreme western Florida panhandle, basically where Michael made landfall. So there could be that possibility.
Particular graphic, it seems to show the track doing what probably would have made Katrina the absolute worst case scenario.
Well, yeah, there is that, and that is, in the middle of that zone that we've put that track there.
Now, granted, it is low confidence at 30%. We were discussing this before we came on air, and I had mentioned it last season, which I know some team members then kind of brushed it off. I still stand by this point, that Texas to Florida panhandle major landfall area could be something that does come out of the Western Caribbean, something similar like a Michael situation or a Harvey situation, where it does develop in that Western Caribbean, where there's still a lot of thermal energy that's untapped from a couple seasons ago, and it will definitely be untapped as we go into this season. So that would definitely be an area that I would be keeping an eye on for that low confidence landfall. If something were like that to occur, would be something coming out of the West Caribbean.
Yeah, and the analogs for this year, I think one of the two main ones, you have 1969 and 2018. Both of them had very powerful hurricanes hit the Gulf Coast, Camille
Just
and
to
Michael.
make a point on that one, though, it's those two seasons are not in our analog list, I must say.
Yeah, but they seem to be, thrown around. But so we could see, another major Gulf storm.
We could. Significant possibility of tropical storms striking western Florida. Moderate chance of a hurricane landfall over in western Florida as well.
Right, so basically like a weaker Wilma scenario.
Well, yes.
And what's this sort of Gilbert Allen track thing?
Right, we're getting onto that. Significant chance of a long-tracking major hurricane in the Caribbean. Roughly a 40% chance it becomes a Category 4 or 5. So basically a 40% chance of an Ivan or a Gilbert-like track there. Small chance, so we're talking 10-20% of late-season intense storm activity in the Western Caribbean. We're thinking of things like Michelle, Paloma as well, and one or two others.
Thinking something like maybe another Rena from like 2017 or 2018.
2011.
Yeah, it was that long ago, Tim.
God.
And finally,
yeah, I do apologize for the viewers that yes, I've been tracking. This would be officially my 25th season tracking
25th
storms,
season.
and I am nowhere near the historian that Nathan and some of the other members are.
How? I was born the year you were tracking. Anyway,
I know that's what's so shameful.
shameful. A significant possibility of tropical storm or hurricane conditions for Bermuda this year. Things are really trending towards that, and moderate chance of significant storm activity in the Azores as well. So those are all of our key messages in the Atlantic this season. I don't know.
Now,
where
I
you
do
guys
want
wanna
to
go
point
from there.
out. I do want to say the Colorado State University's predictions. They are predicting 13 tropical storms, 5 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. But most importantly, they put the probability for at least one major Category 3, 4, or 5 hurricane tracking into the Caribbean and making landfall on the U.S. Gulf Coast
Wow.
at 42%.
That's remarkable. That's even more bullish than what we're saying, actually.
And they went even further and said a major hurricane making landfall on the entire U.S. coastline at 48%.
Yeah, I'd probably go with that, considering the eastern coast threat. Yeah.
I'd even go a little higher than that myself. I'd go up to
Not sure. I mean, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
you're talking about a half chance. It gets more than a half chance. I mean, that's quite a significant chance.
I'm saying more than half
very
chance
possible.
myself.
Yeah, I'd go.
I wouldn't be
more
so
than
sure
that.
about more than 50% at the minute.
Oh, since we're talking about other venues for their predictions, Tropical Storm Risk is forecasting 12, 5, and 2 with an average ACE of 81 for this 2019 season.
So roughly, like right around average is what both Colorado State and Tropical Storm Risk are saying.
All right.
Yeah, if you're talking accumulated cyclone energy, Colorado State University is forecasting 80.
Yes, both are in like low
Those are-
80s.
Yeah, I believe those are a little bit below because I think the seasonal average is usually 127, give or take.
All right. We'll come back to the
No.
Atlantic a little later. I just want to cover all bases because we do have viewers all around the world. Let's go to the Eastern
Right.
Pacific key
Yes.
messages. There aren't that many key messages for the Eastern Pacific in 2019. We're expecting most of the storms to stay away from land, as is typical. But a significant 60% roughly possibility of a hurricane landfall near the tip of Baja California Sur. That is quite specific. So there is a significant confidence in that. A low chance of a significant hurricane to impact the western coast of Mexico between Oaxaca and Jalisco, and the potential, roughly a 30% chance, for a long-tracking intense hurricane, or possibly plural, of Category 4 or 5 intensity. That's mainly signaled by the bottom track there. And a small chance of tropical storm impacts on the Hawaiian Islands. I think we're looking at about 25% or something at max there.
Well, if we get some of the long track hurricanes like we had last season with ones like Hector, Lane, that 25% possibility is definitely there. For the Baja California Sur section, you're talking areas like Cabo San Lucas and points north. I know that's an area that normally does not get hit that often, so
Sort
it
of
is
does.
definitely a possibility.
Yeah, and just a reminder of those numbers there, and we'll move on now to the West Pacific key messages before we open the floor to whatever we want to talk about, or the viewers. The Western Pacific key messages look like this. Just loading it up on my screen here so I can be with you on this one. Yes, this is quite interesting actually. A high chance, so this is the only one that we've got a lot of confidence for, 80% roughly, of an intense typhoon of Category 4 or 5 striking the northern Philippines, which is, well, people think it happens
Another
every year.
big hit.
It doesn't actually happen every year, but it does happen quite often. And we think it might happen again this year.
Common.
Also, a high chance of a typhoon landfall on Hainan, most likely via the Philippines. So it doesn't sound like a very good year for the Philippines by the looks of things on the forecast, especially further north. A significant, roughly 60% chance of a major typhoon of Category 3 or higher striking Taiwan, particularly further south. Again,
I agree with that.
A high
I don't know,
chance...
they'll get
Sorry?
the first Cat 5 since Billis.
Well, I don't know. It's very, very difficult for Category 5 to make it at that intensity to Taiwan. A high chance of major typhoon of Category 3 or higher striking the southern Ryukyu Islands, and a significant chance it's Category 4 or higher. Threat to Japan and Korea is average. Threat to eastern China is below average. Threat to Indochina is below average. And threat to Micronesia and Mariana Islands is near average. That's basically the key messages.
Based on one of those track analogs, still looks like there was enough of a probability to warrant a track analog showing a landfall probability perhaps anywhere between Hong Kong and Shanghai.
That is certainly a possibility as well, yes. The southern coast of China is certainly got the potential there to be one of the worst places. Obviously there is variability, and those again are the numbers for the Western Pacific. 27 tropical storms expected. Alright, I'll open up the floor, and what do you guys want to talk about here? I'm guessing most of you will want to talk about the Atlantic.
That's where I would like to start, but not all.
I'm actually going against the grain. I would actually like to talk about the Westpac, to be honest.
East
If that's
Pacific.
where we want to start, we can ask the viewers, what do you guys want us to start on?
No, we don't want indecision. Let's go to Thomas, and your thoughts on the Atlantic, please.
So I have a good few thoughts on the Atlantic. So the first thing that I really have is that I think a hurricane conditions on the east coast of the United States are likely. I have relatively high confidence in that. From the analogs I've looked at and the data I've analyzed, I'm giving an 80% chance of somewhere on the east coast experiencing hurricane force winds. Where that is, I'm not overly confident about, but I think a hurricane landfall, it may not even be too outlandish to say, at least has a significant chance of occurring. I'd give it about a 50 to 60% chance of a hurricane landfall on the east coast right now. I'd also say that the odds of a Gulf Coast hurricane landfall is very plausible at this point. I'm currently giving it 50-50 at the moment, although I do expect that I will probably be leaning above 50%.
Now you'll notice on the map there, Thomas, that the two tracks, the one that goes through the Caribbean like Ivan and then hooks into the Gulf of Mexico, do you think that could be a joined track there, and possibly both of those happening with the same storm at some point?
Definitely. There are actually some analogs of something like that occurring. I forgot what year it's from. I think it's
2002 would be my guess. Reminds me of Isidore.
Yeah, it really does. But yeah, I think that's definitely possible. I think I actually said here in my own thoughts that I've given that I think that a Yucatan landfall by at least a tropical cyclone of some intensity is very likely. And I think that a Eastern Caribbean hurricane is relatively unlikely to be at least of major strength. But I think to get a hurricane to explode in intensity in the Western Caribbean is definitely a possibility this year.
Based on that sentiment, Thomas, the most recent storm that I can think of that would fit that analog would be Harvey of 2017, where it did make that Yucatan landfall, even though it was still just a remnant low and then blew up in the Western Gulf. So anything in the Western Caribbean up to the Gulf Coast is definitely a high possibility if it can make it through the Eastern Caribbean graveyard.
Yeah.
We're showing the US map again now, and I don't know if you guys have any thoughts on the tropical storm probabilities on this chart.
Yeah, really the areas of concern that we've highlighted seem to be, highlighted here, like the Gulf Coast, really between, Mississippi, Alabama, and parts of the Florida Panhandle and the Carolinas region. And I think that those are really the two greatest risk areas for a significant storm this season?
I'm thinking our forecast is a little aggressive with the Alabama Mississippi one, considering we did have Gordon impact this area last year.
We are just talking about tropical storm conditions here, though.
Right, and I know Gordon was a high-end tropical storm when it made landfall in this area, so I'm not going to rule it out. But even just something like a run-of-the-mill tropical storm like a Gordon, I wouldn't rule it out. As for the Carolinas, the only way I could think of we would get anything similar to what the odds are is if we had something like a Matthew track from 2016 or the oddball track of like Florence like we had last year. Those would be the only two ways I could think theoretically with
obviously
my knowledge base.
You won't be able. It'll be difficult to colour it all in with just one storm, of course. But we're thinking about historic storms. Going back. Some of the storms that struck South Carolina. You could even possibly lump Irene into that list as well.
Even with this, we could probably either have an analog like Fran, where it just stays a depression all the way through the tropical Atlantic and just really starts to intensify right as it's approaching the Carolinas.
Yeah,
and the storms that come to mind for that kind of a possible angle, I guess, would coming into that area would be Matthew from the south. If you wanted to go with the ones that came in kind of at a southeasterly track, that would bring your Floyds, your Frans, your Isabels into play.
Yes, indeed. And I think all of those tracks are possible. About the Gulf, then, which areas do we think are most at risk, in your opinions, and what sort of analogues might we be looking at, apart from the ones that were mentioned earlier?
I did want to ask, before I guess we got into those thoughts, what made you give the oddly specific area of that Alabama, Mississippi area getting those high chances of tropical storm force winds?
Well, I mean, it is quite a large area there when you look at it, really, but it does look a bit conspicuous. It's just how it ended up, using a lot of different analogues and projections as well. It just ended up being that was sort of the epicenter, but it could be quite a swing towards the left. It could be that secondary hotspot, which is just on the border of Louisiana and Texas there. Or it could be in between, or it could be along the edges. Michael furthest east, and possibly even Harvey as a furthest west.
I think that there is a fair chance myself of something really kind of pulling a Wilma and then almost pulling an Arthur, like if you would conjoin to the tracks of Wilma
and Arthur.
And Arthur, if you had Arthur around where it was at South Carolina, where you'd take a Wilma, you'd track it up towards South Carolina, and then you'd take the track Arthur did from there. I think that's a possible scenario.
Okay.
Something like that, Thomas, you'd be looking at almost like a Hermine kind of scenario where it would actually have to impact the Florida Panhandle and come out on the other side just near Savannah in order for it to come out for that kind of track.
Yeah.
I also, not sure if this was mentioned, but I also think there's a probably really high probability of the potential of storms blowing up either in the Western Caribbean or the Gulf of Mexico somewhere.
So
yeah, it really does. It really does look like the Western Caribbean and like the Gulf really is really when the storms are really going to start firing up.
I think we might experience some sort of hot start there.
Well, I know historically, looking over the last 5 or 6 seasons that I've tracked really closely, that it really takes a special kind of storm to hit that Western Caribbean hotspot. We saw it with Michael last season coming off of a gyre off the Central American coastline. We saw it with Harvey in 2017 where it survived the Eastern Caribbean graveyard and was able to make it into the Western Gulf where it fired up with a little bit of help of the Western Caribbean thermal heat that helped revitalize it, and then hit a thermal eddy in the Western Gulf and blew up into the Category 4 that we all know. So yeah, that Western Caribbean corridor right there between, I want to say from Havana down into, I believe that's like the Gulf of Honduras, in that area, that seems to be a really big hotspot that I've seen historically the last 5 or 6 seasons, where if something can make it there and sustain, you will have something coming out of that area.
So as you know, Force 13's forecast numbers are 13, 7, 3 for the Atlantic, 13 tropical storms, 7 hurricanes, 3 major hurricanes. I'm now going to go around everyone here in the room and introduce them, because I haven't properly done that yet, and ask them what they think their numbers should be. So first of all, Ethan, what do you think for the Atlantic this year?
Well, for my prediction, I went with 12 tropical storms, 4 hurricanes, and 2 major hurricanes. I definitely think that this is going to be a below average season. Maybe something like
12
maybe
is
a
around
2014.
12 is around average still. Ryan, how about you?
13, 5, 2. Like, probably near average. Just slightly below average, but it's really hard to tell at this point.
All right. Tim?
I actually had 2 predictions. I had one
2?
at the start. Well, I had one at the start of the new year, based off of the data that we had from last year, and I went 16, 9, and 3. I'm actually going to dial that back for this actual assessment. I'm going to say it's actually be like 14, 6, and 2 this year.
Okay, Max?
My prediction had 12 to 14, 4 to 7, 1 to 3. So, I don't know, average to maybe slightly above average.
Okay. Chap, how about you?
My prediction was about 13, 6, 2. I went just very slightly below average, maybe a little lower than that, but I feel like we might see very slightly below average.
Thomas, you there with us right now? He's on mute at the minute, so I don't think we've got him. Shame. So that's what the whole team think, and you can have your say as well in the comment section during this hour. We have another 28 minutes to run. It's been fun so far and hopefully useful. These are just predictions. No prediction is ever perfect, and I don't think, any prediction that's ever been made from any of the agencies have been perfect in the many years that they've been conducted. This, as you've seen, as you saw in our trail at the beginning, is our 5th year, I think it is, of predictions. 4th or 5th? I think we're only on 4th, actually. Yeah, our 4th year of predictions in the Atlantic. Some have been good, some have been not so good, as you saw in that early trail. But I think we're hitting the mark more than 50% of the time. And it always... it's quite difficult to actually put out numbers when there is that massive margin of error, and as it says below, chance of below average is 33%, chance of near average 38%, chance of above average 29%. Predicting the tracks is even more difficult. Any of you in storm prone areas right now on our team who are expecting a possible storm this year? What do you think?
Based on what we've been discussing, I'd say maybe a tropical storm and maybe weak hurricane could come somewhere around my area.
Now you're in, was it Western Florida?
Eastern Florida.
Eastern Florida, Max. Okay. Yeah, possibility. I mean, I would say the eastern coast is possibly a little bit less likely this year than... What I did want to do for this stream, we didn't have enough time in the end, was to actually create a similar map as we showed before, actually showing the anomaly as to whether it's an above average chance or below average chance, because obviously you have average chances every year anyway, but unfortunately I didn't get round to that. It would have been interesting to see. But you think an above average chance for your area?
maybe not above average.
Okay.
Maybe slightly below average to maybe average. The thing is, when storms hit Western Florida, they do tend to go out through Eastern Florida.
Yes, of course, and those tropical storm force winds will surely be felt there. There is a very tiny bit of orange, which is 56% there in southern Florida, and it looks to be near Lake Okeechobee. And a few areas just north of there as well. So southern Florida is actually looking a little bit more in the clear than central Florida. What do you make of that, if anything?
That if we do see any landfalls, it'll probably be sort of like a Wilma track, but more in sort of the location of Charlie, perhaps.
Yeah, that is probably quite a good shout there. Of course, it could shift north or south.
Yeah.
And then I think, we could be thinking of quite a few different storms that could graze the coast of the Carolinas. I think we might be talking about quite a few grazers this year, or maybe at least one or two.
Indeed, considering areas from like Morehead City, Nags Head, the Outer Banks, down into Wilmington, which got impacted heavily from Florence, going back to Myrtle Beach and Charleston. I mean, those are always areas, even at the start of the season, since most of the tropical formation areas is in around the Gulf Coast and along the Gulf Stream areas. Those are going to be prime areas that could easily take one or two grazes this season, even early in the season.
I agree.
Okay. Let's shift again. Who wanted to talk about the Western Pacific earlier?
I think I was the poor soul that was wanting to cover the Westpac.
Go ahead, it's time.
Thoughts on the Westpac? Well, based on the analogs, I mean, impacts on Luzon is almost, I don't want to say it's absolute, but we are going to see at least a tropical storm, if maybe a minimal typhoon, hit the Luzon region. That's almost a given, considering the area just off the coast of Luzon is the most heavily impacted region in the entire world in terms of tropical cyclone activity. Whether or not we're going to see something go through central Luzon down into the Visayas region, that's really going to depend on the track, and if we have anything that may form, say, out by Guam or Saipan and become a long track typhoon, that's really going to be the determining on if, say, something like central Luzon or further south gets impacted.
I think that's what they're trying to do already. We saw Wu-Tip try. And
Wu-Tip tried it. We saw Bankut pull it last year with the long track from Guam. It stayed kind of in that southerly track, which allowed it to hit central and northern Luzon like it did, and then it did go out and hit. Go for it.
I think it became the first Cat 5 in Luzon since Maggie, am I right?
It had been quite a
gap.
Yeah,
you'd be correct on that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Those there on the map is the chance of typhoon conditions in 2019, well above 50%, concentrated in the northeastern tip of Luzon. Of course, that area is very vulnerable. But also southern China and Hainan Island is actually the biggest hotspot on that map. 91% chance of a typhoon. That's a different terminology than what we're seeing for the Atlantic map there. This is for a typhoon in 2019. And Hong Kong at 64% as well.
And that doesn't surprise me, considering if we do see a more southerly track through central Luzon, maybe impacting the northern Visayas region, places like Hong Kong and Hainan would definitely be prime targets for any typhoon that does make it out on the other side of Luzon. As for a more northerly track, if it grazes and misses Luzon, like we've seen a lot of them do, then you have your worries for Taiwan and the southern Ryukyu Islands in southern Japan.
Yeah, you do see some of the higher chance areas in southern Taiwan, the Ryukyu Islands, and southern Kyushu.
Yes, indeed. Very high chances for those areas, but it typically is a very high chance in any year. But although we are seeing an enhanced possibility of stronger storms passing through the Ryukyu Island chain, possibly of Category 4 intensity. And that would
maybe another Goni, maybe.
More than a half chance of that, actually.
Yeah, that would make your Jebbies and Trammies look very weak compared to what these odds are looking like.
And those who are unfamiliar with... Just one other disclaimer there. Those who are unfamiliar with Japan on the map there, you'll notice the Tokyo region has a higher chance than its surroundings. That's just because a lot of those islands that drift to the southeast of the region are part of Tokyo Prefecture, so that just the whole thing lights up rather than just the islands. We're mainly thinking of those islands further south for those higher chances. The chance in southeastern Japan, where Tokyo is, fairly low, no higher than average, really.
I don't know, with the elevated chances in the Ryukyu Islands in southern Kyushu, you think we might see something like Yancey of 1993 again?
I don't know. It really depends on how the tracks go. If it does...
Yeah.
I've not seen anything statistically anomalous that would suggest that that's possible. That's more likely than usual.
Nah, I don't think I haven't looked at the analogs to see.
But never
what
say
that
never.
would
It could happen.
entail. Oh, absolutely.
I don't think so.
All right, I have returned. I do apologize for leaving for a little bit.
So that's a look at the Western Pacific there. Thomas, I'd just like your thoughts on what you expect for the numbers in the Atlantic this year. We went across everyone else to get their thoughts. How about you?
I'm thinking 13 to 15 tropical storms. So I'd assume that's pretty reasonable. I'd say 5 to 7 hurricanes and 2 to 4 major hurricanes.
Yeah, so very similar to what our numbers are as well there. Alright, let's see if we've got any thoughts from the viewers. We have had a ton of questions come in during the hour. I have watched them fly by, so I'll try and rescue some now. Let's see. Where are we here? What do you think will be the strongest storm of the Atlantic? Are you asking us to name it? Oh dear.
That's just a little premature with that prediction.
I'm calling Melissa right now.
Melissa? Good lord.
Who knows?
I don't know. I'm just saying a name and sticking with my guns.
Alright.
Apparently, Melissa is like a biblical figure, and like there's a prophecy that like this giant hurricane or something.
Yeah, because it's like, you know...
Are you just saying Melissa because it's the M name?
Yeah, I mean...
No, I just said Melissa because it's the only one I can remember.
Become the new cursed name now, the M name. Alright, let's take some more questions. SSTs at the equatorial Pacific, 15 meters below the surface, is getting colder and expanding. According to global weather updates, we could see an ENSO neutral for hurricane season. Any thoughts on that, whether it's true or not?
Well, I mean, most of the models really show, you know, a weak El Nino really throughout the hurricane season.
Oh no, they corrected it to say 150 meters below the surface rather than 15.
And
I think it really depends.
If the El Nino ends up dissipating before we expect, I really just see it primarily remaining neutral and don't really see the development of any kind of La Nina.
Yeah, I mean, it's really uncertain exactly what Enzo is going to do this season. You know, most of the models right now are calling for weak El Nino, but it could be, you know, neutral. It could be, you know, moderate El Nino. Like anywhere within that range, I would say is reasonable, but we really don't know for sure.
One of our contributors here on the channel is watching tonight. Dimitri says, what are the chances for Long Island this year? I hope Long Island hasn't been caught off guard since it's been a while since Sandy. On our graphic, I think that is around the 50% mark for Long Island, especially further east.
And I believe we've had two hurricane equivalent storms that have impacted Long Island. Sandy in 2012 was one of them. And I'm trying to remember the other one that actually hit New York City as a high-end tropical storm or a low-end Category 1 hurricane.
Irene?
Yes.
Irene?
Yeah, we also had Bob of 1991.
I don't know. That hit a bit further east, I think.
Yeah, Bob's a
further
little
east.
bit before my time, but Irene's the one I remember.
Okay, let's see. Any more questions here? We'll get a few minutes at the end to talk about Wallace in the Australian region right now. That is a live storm. It is slowly intensifying just off the west coast of Australia. I think there's only 2 more that came in. Return of the Jebby. Time to board the trammy. Wonderful comment. Thank you very much for that.
That's a good joke. I like that. Who said
That
that?
is a fun.
No, don't give them attention.
Who's the
Shocking
brilliant
behavior.
person that made that?
Shocking
Will
behavior.
a Patricia-like hurricane form in the Atlantic? Probably not.
No. I'm just gonna
highly
go right
unlikely.
now and say no.
I'll actually fill this
Alright.
question. What are
Well-
the chances of a Cat 3 or higher hitting Williamsburg, Virginia? I actually do have a little bit of interest on that question since I
Alright.
will be vacationing there in June. Based on our graphic, Williamsburg is probably on the low end, but it's really going to come down to the angle of some of these storms coming in. If we were to get something that, say, comes up through like the Jacksonville, North Carolina area and tracks northwest, then Williamsburg could catch some impacts. But for that kind of angle, it's really tight for a storm to be actually coming up through the Jacksonville, Nags Head, Morehead City area, mainly due to how most of these storms track.
Yeah, these graphics, by the way, will all be published somewhere, probably on the Force 13 website and on social media as soon as I get a moment, which won't be straight after the stream, unfortunately. I have to run off quickly. So,
Yeah,
probably
bunch of
late
people
on,
are
probably late
asking-
on Saturday, you'll see some graphics pop up if you're interested in examining them in more closely.
I don't know. A lot of people are just asking, like, what will the strongest storm be in terms of miles an hour? How many storms will be retired? Like,
We can't answer those.
will a
questions.
Cat 6 hit Chicago?
Let's not do that.
What?
All right.
Excuse me?
Now,
Excuse me.
let's get back
All
to the
right.
point.
Anyone,
Yeah.
just so you know, if I'm on a stream, please do not mention Cat 6 because I might just go into full rage mode.
Yeah, let's
Some of
not.
you wanted to talk about.
Non-existent.
Some of you wanted to talk about the Eastern Pacific. So here's the chance now. What are we thinking for the East Pacific? Are those who want to?
250 Category 7s.
Come on. Now.
No.
Be serious.
One thing
Well-
I might need to say about the Eastern Pacific is so what was it again? 40-50% of hitting Baja California Sur.
Significant
60%.
chance. Roughly a 60% chance. Rough number.
I don't know.
Like-
Based on that track analog, do you think we might see an Odile-like storm?
Ooh, I'm not so sure about that.
Now, Nathan, what were the predictions for the East Pacific from Force 13?
In terms of numbers.
Yes.
Wait a minute. Where have they gone again? We went with 17, 9, and 4.
Okay.
17 tropical storms, 9
maybe a
hurricanes, 4
Bit
major.
conservative.
Considering the
It
U.S.
seems almost like you're predicting another 2017.
Yes,
Except
that is a
slightly
pretty good
less.
analog that we've identified, actually.
About the I guess the only anything that the like eastern U.S. coast, not eastern, western U.S. coast will experience is maybe a little bit of rainfall from these storms.
Western
I
U.S.
live in southern Nevada and some eastern
Okay,
Pacific
well,
storms.
yeah, actually, if we do look at the Mexico map, chance of tropical storm conditions in Mexico this year, you can see those areas that have the highest chance, and you can see how it extends up to the US border. So we could get a few storms that run in there through the Gulf of California and possibly into your neck of the woods eventually.
Yes, they have given me abnormal rainfall before, and I won't be surprised if they give me some again this year.
Well, considering
That's
last
a
year
fair
we
comment.
had a tropical depression that actually formed in the Gulf of California, which is highly unusual considering how
17
small a real estate that
Mhm.
is.
I don't know. Wasn't it like the first depression to ever form there?
I'm
If
not
I'm not
sure.
mistaken.
But you can see there areas of most interest. Apart from the Baja California Peninsula, you're looking at Jalisco, which is
Mhm.
the bit that's probably most conspicuous there. And on the
Mhm.
Atlantic side, Veracruz. So a significant possibility for either something that comes in from the Western Caribbean and limps over the line into Veracruz, as we quite often see, or something that spins up down there as well.
Now, I'd just like to point out my East Pacific predictions. I am forecasting 20 tropical storms, 11 hurricanes, and 5 major hurricanes this season.
Yeah,
And above average season is favored for my prediction in the East Pacific this year.
Yeah, well
Yeah, I'm
basically
thinking
about
like
20% up from what I was saying there.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
What do
I'm
we have for just the Central Pacific sort of standalone?
There is, I mean, if we just jump back to the US map, there is an area there, Hawaii, the Big Island in particular. What's that percentage there? I think it's 20% roughly for the Big Island to have a significant, to have a tropical storm. There is a possibility of, a pretty small possibility of seeing some intense storms enter that region like we saw last year. But I wouldn't bet everything on that.
That would probably be my guess for this upcoming season is we might have one or two standalone storms that might come out of the Central Pacific, but if the Central Pacific is going to be impacted, it will be something along the lines of maybe a Cat 3 or higher long track hurricane that comes out of the Eastern Pacific.
And we really haven't identified a large chance at all of crossover storms this time from the Central Pacific into the Western Pacific. It's a low chance.
Yeah, that's actually kind of funny. I was looking at some analogs recently, and I give it a 40% chance of a long track hurricane that could potentially cross basins from the EPAC to the Central Pacific. And I'm thinking what's more likely
that's
is
a fair
a
chance.
Eastern Pacific, very far in the Eastern Pacific developing, making it through the Central Pacific and probably dying off as it enters the
No.
Western Pacific. I think
Surely
there's the small
not.
chance of that.
I
I'm
don't
giving
know.
that about
It can happen.
25%.
Maybe
What do
like
you think chances are that we might see a storm come out of the Central Pacific and potentially be an intense storm in the West Pacific?
Unlikely.
But in terms of the impacts with the Jalisco state of Mexico and the California del Sur, you're probably going to be looking for something like that. You're probably going to be looking for something forming down around the Oaxaca, Gulf of Tehuantepec region and taking that northwesterly track that's going to ride the coast, similar to how we've seen some of the Atlantic storms do off the Atlantic. They kind of graze Florida, the Carolina region. You're going to see something that's going to ride the coastline for any kind of impacts that we're calling for with those odds.
And when we're talking about this, we're really thinking of only a handful of storms because, I don't know, probably 80%, maybe a little more, of East Pac storms stay well away from land.
Yeah, historically, most of them do take that west-northwesterly track. They do have a tendency to turn it into that long track system that does go to the west of the Baja California region, does kind of meander its way out to Hawaii, where they do die off, normally between Mexico and Hawaii. The rare ones that do hold themselves together might throw a little bit of rain towards Hawaii if it even impacts them. Most of them normally do go to the north or south of it. I mean, you do have those rare cases like Lane where they can somehow get a little bit of anomaly with their track and actually track north into the Hawaiian Islands, but normally that area between Mexico and Hawaii is normally the East Pac graveyard. Once they get out there, they usually just fizzle out and die.
Okay, any final comments?
I guess while we're still on the East Pac, I guess I can just say my numbers for the spec. I'm
Sure.
thinking, including the Central Pacific, probably like 21 named storms, 12 hurricanes, and 6 majors.
Wow.
Something like mine.
Yeah, kind of like yours, chap.
I guess I could also share my numbers.
That
I
was
would
Ethan,
have
I
to
think.
say.
Go ahead, chap.
All right. I would have to say 18, 18, 9, and 4. 18 major no. Excuse me. 18 tropical storms, 9
Yes.
hurricanes, 4 major hurricanes, similar to Force 13's prediction.
Huh, interesting. All right, we are out of time, I'm afraid.
I just found something in chat. I have to read. It's golden. I will not
God.
say the name of this person, but they said, "Will a cat 100 quintillion hit Antarctica? Please answer. I need it for a school project."
Yes.
Yes.
No, just say yes.
Yes,
But
it will happen.
It will happen in the future.
Absolutely.
All right, we need to spend 1 or 2 minutes talking about Cyclone Wallace.
Yes, let's go down to the South Pacific, where obviously we know David is keeping an eye on that area with his eagle eyes.
Indian Ocean.
Wallace.
Cyclone Wallace is located just south of, it's just south of East Timor, I think it is. Just northwest
That sounds about right.
of the western part of Australia. Well, we're still sort of towards the top end, really. And it's really filling out by the looks of things on our latest satellite imagery. What do we all think?
Oh no, GTWC has it at 40 knots, which would be 45 miles an hour. I don't know what their pressure is.
I think it's stronger
The
than that.
latest
Maybe a little
ATC
bit.
The latest ATCF update, which came out moments ago, put Wallace at 40 knots and 993 millibars.
Really, they've not changed it. I am surprised. Is that a wind shear off to the east?
It does look like it's getting shared in the last couple frames,
Yeah, that is definitely
albeit
sheer.
that the center does look like it is still trying to cover up with a little bit of convection, so it might definitely be battling the shear, but I think once it gets away from the shear, we might see a little bit more organization in the next 24, 36 hours.
The Bureau of Meteorology put the storm at the same wind speeds, 40 knots, 10 minutes sustained, but with a pressure of 997 millibars.
All right. Well, further updates will probably be produced by David, because I'm not here tomorrow or Sunday. Sorry about that, folks. But David over there in Australia will be keeping you up to date on the main channel and on the Force 13 AU channel as well locally. You can follow both of those on YouTube and elsewhere. Guys, it's been wonderful to have your thoughts and opinions with us tonight. Both the team and the viewers have turned out excellently for us again. Thank you very much for taking part. And that pretty much concludes our forecast video. You can catch this live stream. You can watch it back after the fact when it's finished. Okay, we shouldn't really be looking at that. Well, we could if we wanted to, but there we go. But there we go. That's everything for now. And we wait and see what actually verifies this year. We're expecting 13 tropical storms in the Atlantic, 7 hurricanes and 3 major hurricanes. In the Eastern Pacific, I should be able to remember these numbers offhand by now, 17 tropical storms, 9 hurricanes and 4 majors. These are Force 13's predictions. In the Western Pacific, 27 tropical storms, 14 typhoons and 10 major typhoons. And in the North Indian Ocean, we're expecting 6 tropical storms, 2 Category 1 equivalent or higher and 1 Category 3 equivalent or higher. That's all from us at the team here, and we'll see you again soon, and we'll keep you up to date with Cyclone Wallace. Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.